Alright, welcome back. This is another original story, this one about in-laws who believed boundaries didn't apply to them. That belief didn't last long. Let's get into it. My mother-in-law demanded that my 9-year-old daughter give her $1,600 MacBook to her cousin as a gift. She told her that if she refused, she shouldn't call her grandma anymore. Then my husband stepped in, and what he said wiped the color straight off his parents' faces. I knew something was wrong the moment my daughter walked through the front door. Grace usually enters the house like a Category 5 storm. Shoes kicked off in the general direction of the shoe rack. Backpack dropped wherever gravity decides. A rapid-fire recap of her day delivered with the boundless confidence of someone who has never paid a bill in her life. That night, she came in like she was entering a library. Quiet. Careful. Her shoulders were hunched up around her ears, like she was trying to fold herself into her hoodie and disappear. Michael came in behind her, holding her overnight bag. My husband's expression was neutral, the kind of neutral he thinks is unreadable. I've been married to him long enough to know it's not. They're fine, he said before I could ask. Mom and Dad. Grace had a good time. Grace said nothing. She didn't even look at me. That was not a good time. I waited. Sometimes kids just need a minute to transition. Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they're hungry. Sometimes they've decided pants are a personal attack and are quietly planning resistance. Grace walked past me, down the hallway, and closed her bedroom door with a soft click. Not a slam. Not dramatic. Just, final. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door like it might reopen and explain itself. Michael set the bag down and shrugged slightly, like we were both watching a strange documentary about our own child. She was a little quiet in the car, he said. Probably just tired. Tired kids still ask for snacks. Tired Grace still argues that bedtime is oppression. This was different. I made dinner. Nothing elaborate, just the kind of meal you cook when you're hoping routine might stitch things back together. While the pasta boiled, I knocked gently on her door. Hey, sweetheart. You hungry? A pause. Not really. Strike two. Grace treats hunger like a mild inconvenience that can be solved with crackers and stubbornness. Not really meant something was wrong. Okay, I said lightly. I'll leave you a plate if you change your mind. Another pause. Okay. I glanced at Michael. He was scrolling on his phone like it held answers. When he looked up and saw my face, he put it down. That alone told me he felt it too. We ate at the kitchen table, just the two of us. The third chair sat empty, and I couldn't explain why it bothered me as much as it did. Every so often, I heard movement from Grace's room, drawers opening, footsteps pacing. Then silence again. After dinner, I attacked the dishes with unnecessary intensity. Michael offered to dry. I knew why. Staying busy meant he didn't have to sit with the thing we weren't naming. I dried my hands, walked down the hall, and knocked again. Grace, can I come in? A long pause. Yeah. She was sitting on her bed, knees tucked up, staring at the carpet like it held the answer to a complicated equation. Her cheeks were flushed. Her lashes were damp. My chest tightened. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. Hey. What's going on? She shrugged. Not the dramatic kind. A small, defeated shrug. Nothing. I waited. Okay, I said softly. Nothing can still feel big sometimes. She swallowed. Her throat bobbed. I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Did something happen at Grandma Patricia's? Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. Not really. Strike three. I didn't push. I didn't interrogate. I didn't want her to feel cornered. I just sat there with her in the quiet until her breathing slowed. Do you want to read? I asked. Or watch something silly? She shook her head. Do you want me to stay for a minute? Another pause. Then a tiny nod. So I stayed. I sat on my daughter's bed and listened to the silence like it might eventually tell me the truth. When her breathing evened out, I kissed her forehead and said goodnight. Back in the kitchen, Michael was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, staring into nothing. She okay? He asked. I don't think so, I said. He let out a slow breath. Mom didn't say anything strange. Dad didn't either. It was normal. Normal can be a costume. Some families wear it the way others wear cologne. Heavy, deliberate, meant to cover something else. I almost said that. I didn't. The last thing I wanted was a fight about his parents when my instincts were already on edge. We went to bed. I didn't sleep. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. A sound so small I almost missed it. Tape. That soft, sticky rip that only comes from wrapping something. I sat up, heart pounding. Michael slept beside me, one arm thrown over his face like he was blocking out the world. The sound came again. Tape. Then paper crinkling. I slipped out of bed and moved down the hallway. The house was dim, lit only by a nightlight near the outlet. Grace's door was slightly open, a thin line of light spilling onto the floor. I pushed it open. And stopped. Grace was sitting on the floor, surrounded by scraps of wrapping paper, a half-used roll of tape, and a length of ribbon that looked like it had been salvaged from an old gift bag. In front of her sat her MacBook, not the box, the laptop itself. She was wrapping it carefully, like it was meant for a celebration. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the rest of me hadn't caught up yet. Grace, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. Sweetheart, what are you doing? She froze mid-motion, tape clinging to her fingers. Her eyes shot up to mine. For a split second, she looked like she'd been caught in headlights. Then her face crumpled. She whispered. I crouched down in front of her. Honey, why are you wrapping your laptop? Her lips quivered. She blinked hard, like she was trying to hold the tears back by sheer determination. I'm giving it to Lucas, she said. I stared at her. You're, what? I'm giving it to Lucas, she repeated, her voice shaking. For his birthday? My brain tried to make sense of that sentence and failed. Grace had wanted that MacBook more than anything she'd ever asked for in her 9 years. Not to play games. Not to show it off. She wanted it because she dreams of making videos. She edits tiny films the way other kids draw pictures. She's been talking about camera angles and sound effects since she could hold an iPad. That laptop wasn't a toy to her. It was her future, wrapped in aluminum and glass. And you want to give it away? I asked carefully, like I was approaching something fragile. Grace nodded. The tears finally spilled. It's not fair. Not fair? My voice came out quieter than I expected. It's not fair that I have it, she said, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. And Lucas doesn't. I don't want to be spoiled. I don't want to be bad. My chest tightened. Kids don't invent that kind of guilt on their own. They don't decide out of nowhere that they're morally responsible for redistributing joy. That kind of thinking doesn't come naturally. It's taught. I sat back on my heels. Who told you that? Grace shook her head immediately, like the answer itself was dangerous. Grace, I said gently. I'm not upset with you. I just need to understand. She sniffed, her eyes flicking toward the laptop like it might disappear. Who told you that you had to do this? I asked again. For a few seconds, she just cried quietly, like her body had finally given up trying to hold everything inside. Then she whispered, Grandma Patricia. My blood went cold. And Grandpa George was there, she added quickly, as if it was important to be fair, even now. I swallowed. What did Grandma Patricia say? Grace's voice grew smaller. She said it wasn't right that I have something so expensive and Lucas doesn't. She said a good granddaughter would share. She hesitated, eyes squeezed shut. And? I prompted softly. Grace opened her eyes and looked at me with pure fear. She said if I don't do it, her voice dropped to a whisper. I can't call her grandma anymore. Something hot and fierce rose in my chest, the kind of anger that makes your hands tremble. The kind that comes from someone hurting your child to get what they want. Behind me, the hallway floor creaked. Jess? Michael's voice was groggy. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, hair sticking up, blinking like he'd walked straight into a nightmare. What's going on? He asked. Grace looked at him, then down, clutching the edge of the wrapping paper like it was the only solid thing in the room. I straightened, my heart pounding. Michael, I said tightly. Your mother told our daughter that if she doesn't give Lucas her laptop, she's not allowed to call her grandma anymore. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a different language. What? Grace nodded, miserable. Michael crossed the room and dropped to his knees in front of her. Grace, he said quietly. Did Grandma really say that? She nodded again. His jaw clenched. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something I almost never saw when it came to his parents. Not patience. Not compromise. Not the instinct to smooth things over. Something solid. He stood. Without a word, he pulled his phone from his pocket. I blinked. It was after midnight. The house was dark. Our daughter was crying on the floor in a nest of wrapping paper. And my conflict-avoiding, peacekeeping husband was unlocking his phone like he was about to make a very intentional mistake. Michael, I started. No, he said quietly. Not angry. Just done. Grace watched him like he was about to step into a storm. I watched him like I already knew he was. 5 minutes later, Michael said something to his parents that permanently changed the rules of our family. Something that made their voices fall silent on the other end of the line. Because for the first time since I'd known him, my husband wasn't calling to keep the peace. Before Michael, I thought I understood family problems. In my world, family issues were irritating, not harmful. The kind you roll your eyes at and move past. Michael was calm in a way that felt like safety. He listened. He smoothed things over. He worked hard to make everyone comfortable, even when they didn't deserve it. At first, I thought that was just his personality. Then I met his parents. Patricia and George were polished, pleasant. The kind of couple who could make you feel welcomed while still somehow making you feel out of place. Patricia praised Michael constantly, but her compliments always came with a hook. You're the responsible one, she'd say with a smile. Not like some people. I never knew who some people were. I just knew Michael would laugh and let it go. He always let it go. The first time I realized I wasn't imagining things was when we started talking about money, the unromantic, uncomfortable kind. We were sitting on my couch, sharing popcorn, when Michael casually mentioned his student loans. I'm still paying them off, he said. I frowned. Your parents didn't help at all? He didn't look up. No. I waited for an explanation that would make it make sense. None came. They paid for Kathleen's college, he added. Your sister? I asked. Yeah. She's 3 years younger. So they paid for hers, I said slowly. But not yours. Michael nodded like this was perfectly normal. And you're okay with that? I asked. He looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Jess, they said she needed it more. That sentence became policy. She needed it more. Kathleen was delicate. Kathleen was still finding herself. Kathleen would crumble without help. Michael, on the other hand, was capable. Michael would be fine. Michael could manage. So he did. He worked while he went to school. He paid his own tuition. He built his career the long, exhausting way because no one was stepping in to make it easier. Kathleen kept drifting. New major, new plan, new dream every year. Eventually, she graduated with something she called passion. Then she married a man who drifted right alongside her. Then came Lucas. And Lucas became the center of gravity. Patricia and George talked about him like he was the sun and everyone else was lucky to circle nearby. His needs were urgent. His disappointments were emergencies. Every small frustration was treated like a crisis that required immediate attention. And somehow, Michael stayed in orbit too. That was the part that always struck me as strange. He stayed polite. He stayed helpful. He contributed financially. He helped Kathleen. He helped Lucas. He showed up over and over, even when no one asked him to, especially when no one thanked him. Michael and I both work in IT. We're steady. Not wealthy, but comfortable. And still, there was always this quiet outflow, money slipping from our account like a slow, persistent leak. They need help, Michael would say. Just this once. I can handle it. Patricia loved that phrase. She praised him for being such a good son when he gave, and acted wounded when he hesitated. George stayed silent and let Patricia steer. He always did. And the favoritism didn't stop with the adults. Lucas was treated like royalty. Grace was treated like an afterthought. Patricia could list Lucas's hobbies without hesitation but regularly forgot what Grace enjoyed. George would light up talking about Lucas's sports, then turn to Michael and quietly ask if he could cover something. Patricia would go on about how hard Lucas's year had been, how much he deserved something special, then hand Grace a generic gift that looked like it had been grabbed at the last minute. Sometimes Patricia's voice stayed sweet while the message underneath turned sharp, like affection was a reward you earned by behaving correctly. Michael didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. And I kept telling myself the same thing over and over, it's manageable. It's irritating. It's unfair, but it's manageable. Without realizing it, I told myself something else too. Michael can be used. But Grace is safe. Then came Grace's birthday. We kept it simple. Family. Cake. Balloons. Grace had been talking about video editing for months, real interest, real effort. Tutorials, tiny scripts, opinions about lighting like she was a miniature director. Michael and I saved. We wanted to support her dream, not just hand her another toy. So we bought the MacBook. When Grace opened it, she froze, like her brain couldn't accept that it was real. Then she made this sound, half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around us like we'd just handed her the future. I was still holding that moment when I looked up. Lucas was watching. He didn't look excited. He looked tight. Disappointed. Like something meant for him had been given to someone else. Kathleen's smile stiffened. She didn't wait long. Wow, she said, a little too loudly. That's a lot. It's for Grace's editing, Michael said. Kathleen waved it off. You gave her something like that in front of everyone? Her eyes flicked toward Lucas. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? I stared at her. How it makes you look? I can't afford something like that for my son, Kathleen snapped. So now Lucas feels bad, and I look like a terrible mother. I watched Grace's excitement dim just a fraction. That was what made my stomach drop, the speed at which an adult's jealousy could reach a child. And Patricia and George did nothing. They didn't correct her. They didn't shut it down. They didn't say, "This is Grace's birthday." Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. George looked uncomfortable, and stayed silent. After that, it continued. Little comments. Small jabs. So fancy, someone would say when Grace used the laptop. Your mom really spoils you, Patricia would add with a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. Nothing obvious enough to call out without being told you were overreacting. but enough to feel the resentment gathering, slow and heavy, like a storm building pressure. Looking back, that birthday wasn't just a celebration. It was the moment the laptop became a symbol, and some people in that room decided they didn't like what it represented. The video call connected faster than I expected. Michael chose video. He didn't explain why, but I knew. When you can see someone's face, they can't later claim you misunderstood. They can't hide behind tone. They can't rewrite what happened nearly as easily. And this time, Michael wasn't calling to smooth things over. I stayed out of frame, standing just behind Michael so I could see the screen without being seen. Grace sat cross-legged on her bed, clutching a pillow to her chest, her eyes wide and anxious as she watched. Patricia and George appeared on their screen. The camera angle was off, tilted too high. Patricia leaned forward, adjusted something, then blinked like she'd only just realized what time it was. "Michael," she said, her brightness flickering for half a second. "Honey, it's very late." George squinted at the screen, glasses on, hair mussed. He lifted a slow, uncertain wave. They didn't look tired exactly. They looked exposed. Like someone had flipped on the lights in a room they assumed was private. Michael's voice was calm. Polite. Almost overly so. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad." Patricia recovered quickly, pasting on a daytime smile. "How was Grace? Did she enjoy her visit?" My jaw tightened. Michael didn't answer. "We need to ask you something." Patricia's brows lifted. "Oh?" Michael inhaled. "Grace was wrapping her laptop tonight. She said she was giving it to Lucas for his birthday." Patricia let out a small laugh, light and dismissive. "Well, that's very generous of her." Michael didn't react. "Mom, did you tell her she had to do that?" There it was. Flat. Direct. Patricia didn't hesitate. She didn't deny it. "Yes," she said simply. "Of course." Michael's shoulders stiffened. "You gave a 9-year-old a very expensive gift," Patricia continued, her voice sharpening. "That's not appropriate. And Lucas doesn't have anything like that. It isn't fair." George nodded once, slow and deliberate, like the matter had already been settled. "It's for her editing," Michael said. "You know that." Patricia waved a hand. "It's still too much. And Lucas wants one. He'd appreciate it." Grace made a small sound, barely audible, something between a breath and a sob. I rested my hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it immediately. Michael's voice cooled. "Did you tell Grace she couldn't call you Grandma if she didn't give it to Lucas?" Patricia smiled again, but this time it wasn't warmth. It was strategy. "I told her," she said, "that if she wants to be part of this family, she needs to learn how to share." Michael stared at the screen. "That's not what I asked." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "If she wants to be my granddaughter," she said carefully, "she needs to act like one." Something shifted in Michael's face. Subtle, but unmistakable. The part of him that smoothed edges and absorbed discomfort vanished. He pushed his chair back and stood. Even through the screen, the change was visible. Grace's eyes widened. So did mine. Patricia blinked, sharper now. George straightened. Michael's voice was quiet, but solid. "If you want to be Grace's grandparents," he said, "then you need to act like it." Patricia opened her mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "Michael, it's the middle of the—" "No," Michael cut in. "One word. Firm. Final. You do not threaten a child's sense of love to get what you want. You do not guilt her into giving up something that matters to her. And you do not use family as leverage." The color drained from Patricia's face. George's mouth opened, then closed. Silence fell, not the thoughtful kind, but the stunned kind. The kind that comes when people realize the rules they've relied on no longer apply. Michael held their gaze. "We're done." And then he ended the call. No apology. No soft landing. No, let's talk about this later. He just clicked it off. I stared at him. Grace stared at him. Michael stared at his phone, like he couldn't quite believe he'd done it. Then he turned to Grace and knelt in front of her. His voice softened, but his words didn't. You are not giving your laptop to Lucas, he said. Do you understand? Grace's eyes filled again. She nodded. Michael took her hands gently. You do not have to give up something you love to make adults happy. That is not love. And that is not family. Her lip trembled. But Grandma said. I don't care what Grandma said, Michael replied. And the way he said it, steady, unflinching, made my chest feel lighter. If she wants to be your grandma, he continued, she will act like one. Not the other way around. Grace released a shaky breath, like she'd been holding it in for hours. Michael looked at me. We're not going tomorrow, he said quietly. I nodded. I didn't need to ask. Lucas's birthday. Michael picked up his phone and typed a short message. No explanations. No bargaining. We won't be coming tomorrow. Later, after Grace finally fell asleep, Michael sat at his desk, shoulders slumped. He looked exhausted, not just physically, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying weight for years. I've been supporting them for so long, he said quietly. I know, I said. I kept telling myself it was temporary, he continued. That they just needed help. That Kathleen would get on her feet. That my parents would appreciate it. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. And then they did this to Grace. And that was the moment everything finally stopped being negotiable. He opened his banking app and pulled up transfers, auto payments, recurring charges. I watched him scroll, slow and focused, like he was reading a record of his own past. Then he started ending them, one at a time. He canceled the monthly transfer to Patricia and George, $650 for bills. He canceled the payment to Kathleen, $400 for groceries and rent. He canceled the recurring charge for Lucas's activities, $220 a month. He removed his card from the shared phone plan he'd been covering, $180. $1,450 a month. Michael stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop and looked at me. I'm done, he said. I'm done paying people who hurt my kid. I took his hand and squeezed it. Good, I said quietly. Me too. That night, the house felt different. Not heavy. Just still. Calm in a way it hadn't been before. Lying in bed, one thought kept circling in my head. Tomorrow was Lucas's birthday. We weren't going. And the money wasn't going either. Patricia, George, and Kathleen were going to notice. The morning after Lucas's birthday, my phone started vibrating like it was having a breakdown. I glanced at the screen and immediately regretted being awake. Kathleen had posted one of those long, emotional social media essays. The kind that never names what actually happened, but somehow still paints you as the villain by the end. According to her, Michael had thrown a tantrum and cut everyone off right before Lucas's birthday. According to her, we had dragged adult conflict onto a child and ruined Lucas's special day. Then she mentioned Grace. Grace. A 9-year-old. Apparently, Grace had refused to help her cousin, and that selfishness had deeply hurt Lucas. I stared at the post, my pulse pounding in my ears, thinking, if you have to use a child's name to win an argument, you've already lost. I kept scrolling. Patricia commented, we thought we raised him better. George wrote about being abandoned by his own son, which was impressive, considering he was typing it while sitting comfortably inside the bills Michael had been paying. A few relatives added sad face emojis and vague sympathy. A couple people asked what had actually happened. Kathleen responded with more carefully curated sadness. Lots of emotion. Zero facts. Michael stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. He went very still. Then my phone rang. It was a relative who'd been at the party. "Jess," she said quietly. "Just so you know, Lucas had a meltdown." I closed my eyes. About what? He wanted Grace's laptop. He thought he was getting it. When it didn't show up, he screamed, cried, demanded they buy him one. It was a lot. I let out a slow breath. "So the birthday wasn't ruined by us," I said. "It was ruined by a kid who didn't get a $1,600 surprise." "Yes," she said. "And Kathleen's leaving that part out." When I hung up, Michael lowered himself into a chair like his legs had finally given up pretending they were fine. "They're saying I never helped," he said quietly. I turned. "What?" He showed me his phone. Kathleen had written, plainly, that Michael had never lifted a finger. Never supported them. Never helped. That was the part that broke through. Not the insults. Not the smear campaign. The rewrite. Years of just this once. Years of being dependable. Erased in a single sentence. Michael didn't yell. He didn't rant. He just stared at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. I stayed close. This was new territory for him. Standing up to his family wasn't a muscle he'd ever exercised, and it was already trembling. More comments poured in. People cheering Kathleen on, people asking questions, people clearly enjoying the drama like it was free entertainment. Grace wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I flipped my phone face down so fast it could have been a magic trick. She didn't need to see adults arguing about her like she was a trophy. Michael watched her walk away. Something settled in his expression. "I'm replying," he said. I swallowed. "Okay." He typed slowly. Calmly. No rage. No chaos. He told the truth. That Grace had been wrapping her laptop because Patricia and George told her she had to give it to Lucas. That Patricia told her she couldn't call her grandma if she refused. That Grace had been crying, terrified of losing her grandmother's love. Then he wrote the part Kathleen had counted on no one questioning. He listed the payments. Clean. Factual. $650 a month to Patricia and George. $400 a month to Kathleen. $220 a month for Lucas's activities. $180 for the phone plan. $1,450 a month. 4 years. Then he added one final sentence. I have receipts. No screenshots. No threats. Just a statement. Like a locked door. He hit post. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the tone shifted. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But noticeably. Wait, she threatened a child? She told her she couldn't call her grandma anymore? People started doing the math out loud, which is always a terrible day for liars. A few relatives messaged Michael privately to apologize. A couple commented publicly that this was wrong, that adults don't weaponize love, and they definitely don't do it to a 9-year-old. Kathleen stopped responding. And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt earned. Patricia and George stopped commenting, and for the first time since midnight, the silence didn't feel tense. It felt like relief. A few weeks later, the doorbell rang. Michael and I exchanged a look, the kind married people develop when both already know they're about to be annoyed. Michael opened the door. Patricia and George were standing there. Kathleen hovered behind them, the designated backup. Patricia held a cake in a clear plastic container with a grocery store label, like it was a peace offering she'd picked up next to the rotisserie chickens. Hi, she said, voice saccharine. We brought this for you. Michael's eyes flicked to the cake, then to his mother. What do you want? Patricia's smile wavered. We want to move forward. We understand now. We overreacted. George nodded slowly, like he was agreeing with a point he hadn't said aloud. Patricia stepped closer. We should go back to how things were. There it was. Michael didn't blink. No. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Michael, you're not here because you're sorry, he said, calm as a locked safe. You're here because the money stopped and the sympathy didn't work. Patricia's face tightened. That's not. Michael lifted a hand. If you want contact with Grace, it will be on my terms. Patricia looked ready to argue, but he kept going. No money, he said. None. Kathleen's jaw clenched. You will apologize, Michael continued. You will behave. Visits will be supervised. You don't get private access to her. You don't get to guilt her. You don't get to threaten her. And if I hear one more request for money or one more attempt to manipulate my child, you won't see her at all. Patricia stared at him like he was a stranger. George looked stunned. Kathleen's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. You've changed, Patricia said, voice sharper than usual. Michael nodded once. Yes. I have. Patricia held out the cake one last time, like sugar could patch the hole where accountability should have been. Michael didn't take it. Her hand fell. They left. Not with a bargain, not with a victory, just gone. When the door clicked shut, Michael exhaled slow and shaky, like he'd been holding his breath for years. I wrapped my arms around him. He hugged me tight. In that quiet, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped before: boundaries don't just protect children. They protect the people who were trained to believe they weren't allowed to have any. 6 months later, our life looked completely different. Not because we moved or came into money, but because we stopped paying for other adults to live. Without monthly transfers, extra help, and the quiet financial drain, our home felt spacious. We weren't suddenly rich, but we weren't constantly calculating. We could breathe. We took Grace on extra little trips, weekend getaways, simple vacations that felt indulgent because we weren't stressed the entire time. We spent more time together, and Grace seemed lighter, like she wasn't carrying the weight of invisible responsibility anymore. Michael was different too. Less tense. Less apologetic. More grounded. He learned something I still find remarkable: he didn't have to buy his place in the family. He didn't have to pay for peace. Patricia and George tested the waters a few times over the months, little nudges, small attempts to slip back into the old normal, but every time, Michael held firm. Eventually, they adapted. Now, they see Grace every other week. Always supervised. Always with Michael and me present. No private talks, no "we'll just take her for ice cream," no whispered guilt in the back seat. And the funny thing? Grace enjoys it more now because she isn't afraid. She knows we're right there. Kathleen and Lucas adjusted too. Without our money, Kathleen had to cancel the extras, vacations, luxury add-ons, expensive upgrades they'd grown accustomed to. They still had enough for basics: rent, groceries, utilities. What they lost was the cushion, the comfort, the unearned sponsorship. Watching that happen made one thing very clear: they didn't need Michael to survive. They needed him to maintain a level of comfort they felt entitled to. Our home is happier now. Grace is secure. Michael is free from being the family ATM. And Patricia can't weaponize the word grandma anymore because that word is no longer something Grace has to earn by giving things away. So here's what I want to know. Did Michael do the right thing by cutting them off financially? Did he go too far, or not far enough? Was supervised contact the right choice, or should we have gone no contact completely? And was I right to support him, to stand behind his boundaries no matter what his family thought?